Okay, guys, let's do some sermon prep for the Moses sermon series number 4. So this is lesson 4 in that the God of Moses series from pursuegod.org. Again, you can add your own comments and share your own posts or insights or manuscripts or anything like that in the comments below this video. But let's just walk through this real quick. Okay, so here's kind of the big idea. The story of Moses teaches us that God doesn't call us out of slavery for a brief glimpse of the promised land, but he has a power to deliver us for good from any kind of bondage. So we're talking about bondage. We're talking about breaking bondage, breaking addictions, and I'm going to start off my sermon by just saying that it comes in many forms. So there are 3 that I'm just going to sort of keep referring to throughout the sermon. You might use these 3 or some of your own, but bondage to an addiction, bondage to a toxic relationship, or bondage to an irrational fear. I think that covers most people. You might also want to throw in like materialism or something like that. Whatever makes the most sense for your church, for your group, for your congregation. So, but the whole point is we're looking at the story of Exodus, that last part of the story, leaving and the parting of the Red Sea, that whole thing. And we're going to see that it's a story of deliverance with practical lessons for breaking bondage today. And so there are 3 lessons. Lesson number 1, God is the higher power. Obviously, this sort of refers a little bit to the AA thing, that we have a higher power. But of course, in the story of Exodus, it's not just some vague light bulb idea, but it really is God. Okay, so for generations, the Israelites had been enslaved to the powerful Egyptians, but that was all about to change because God was stronger than Pharaoh. And so he made that clear. You might reference the 10 plagues. You would probably won't have a lot of time to reference those, but those 10 plagues, just one after the other, prove that God was more powerful than Pharaoh, and so Pharaoh finally admits it, and you can look at that verse to see that Pharaoh finally admits it and lets the Israelites go. What a powerful lesson for us today. God has authority over addictions, over toxic relationships, over irrational fear. So that's kind of the starting point if you want to have freedom, is to recognize that God is stronger than that thing that you are enslaved to. So then the second lesson is that freedom requires boundaries. And that's a little bit sort of counterintuitive, because usually when we think about freedom, we're thinking about, I don't need any boundaries. I don't need any fences. If I'm free, I can just do whatever I want. But it's interesting that when God delivered his people from bondage, he protected them by setting boundaries right away, because he realized that as they fled one evil power, the Egyptians, he had to take them on a route to avoid another, which is the Philistines. And because early in their journey, God recognized that they were vulnerable. And how true is that for people trying to come out of a bad relationship or an addiction or a fear that they have or whatever? You're vulnerable when you're coming out of that. And so you have to recognize that and set up proper boundaries. That's what God did. You can read that verse. God set up a boundary. He didn't bring them through the Philistine territory, but he brought them on a roundabout route to the promised land. And so we're most vulnerable at the beginning of the journey out of bondage. And I think that's really a great practical point to make for people today. And so I just have a few examples of this. If you're fleeing alcoholism, stay away from bars and old drinking buddies, obviously. If you're fleeing a toxic relationship, watch out for the rebound relationship. If you're fleeing irrational fears, identify and replace those toxic thoughts. So you have to put a boundary. This takes a little bit of self-control and put a boundary on that. And then the last lesson really from this story is that sustained victory takes time. So God didn't just sort of do one of the old beam me up Scotties and transport them to the promised land. It was going to be a journey, and it takes time if it's going to be sustained victory. And so we see that God was with them night and day. He was committed to them along the journey. Today, of course, God leads by his Spirit, his word, and his people. You can click on that link to learn more about that trifecta that we talk about in Foundations Truth number 2. God's Spirit, God's word, and God's people. Those are all really important for us if we want to have sustained victory. For people who are struggling with an addiction or a toxic relationship or an irrational fear, you really need to depend on God's Spirit, his word, and then also his people. If you don't have a mentor or a small group, you're going to be in big trouble. But that journey is going to take some time. The enemy is going to pursue you, just like in the story. The Israelites were pursued by the Egyptians, and the Egyptians caught up to them at the Red Sea. But I love this last verse here that we're using. But Moses told his people Don't be afraid. Just stand still. Watch the Lord rescue you today. And he did. You know the story. It's a famous story where the Israelites were rescued. And of course, if you want to, you can mention the fact that they were in the desert for 40 more years, but they were free from their bondage to the Egyptians and eventually made it to the promised land. And what a great allegory! What a great picture of having freedom, sustained freedom, to live in the promised land as a follower of Jesus. Freedom over whatever that bondage is. So again, a real powerful, simple message. I encourage you to check out the discussion questions. Also check out some of these other resources you might want to look at as you're prepping your sermon, especially some of these toward the bottom, the addiction videos and some of the toxic thoughts and words videos and relationships videos. So you might want to check out some of those related resources as part of your sermon prep. You also might want to check out the youth and kids edition of the sermon. And if you want to add some of your own insights or ideas, or if you want to share a link to your sermon notes or manuscript, do that in the comments below this video.